Hi, I'm Geneva Hartman. The company was my vision, my grind, my blueprint scribbled on diner receipts during sleepless nights. Then, one Monday morning, my phone dinged with a group text. Expect a call from our attorney. No context, no warning. Just that. They didn't even bother to fake kindness. No? Are you okay? No, let's talk. Just silence wrapped in legalese. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. By 8:30 p.m., I had sold my 51% stake quietly, cleanly. I didn't even wait until morning. 69 missed calls later, still not one message said sorry. It was Tuesday, 9th, 15 a.m., and a thick fog had settled against the high-rise windows like breath on a mirror. I sat in my corner office, 34 floors up in downtown Minneapolis, motionless, the city a blurry canvas beyond the glass. My coffee sat untouched, the steam long gone. Then my phone buzzed just once. I glanced at the screen already knowing. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was from her. Expect a call from our attorney. Not hi, sweetheart. Not. We need to talk. Just a sterile warning. From my own mother, Colleen Hartman. I blinked. Once. Twice. As if the sender's name might morph into something else. But it didn't. This wasn't a boardroom enemy. This wasn't a rival tech firm clawing at my market share. This was my mother. And when I saw the CC field, my stomach dropped. Lauren. Of course. Lauren always knew first. My younger sister, the golden one, with the glossier resume and the louder laugh. She was named COO without so much as a conversation. Approved in a board vote I hadn't even known was scheduled. This wasn't a snub at a family brunch. This wasn't my name getting left off a press release or swapped to second billing. This was war. Legal. Deliberate. Cold. They weren't just pushing me to the side anymore. They were erasing me. I turned back to the foggy skyline. Minneapolis. In November always felt like it wanted to vanish. My fingertips drifted across the brass plate on my desk, Geneva Hartman, CEO and co-founder. Once it meant something. Once it earned nods in meetings and features in local business magazines. It also meant sleeping under my desk more than I slept at home. It meant ramen at 1 a.m. and tracking beta feedback from an app that barely functioned. This company wasn't handed to me. I built it with $40,000 on a scratched credit line from a small community credit union. My mom came on board a year later after Dad died. Said she wanted to bring structure. I thought she meant support. I was wrong. She didn't mean support. She meant control. Lauren came next, fresh out of grad school with a polished LinkedIn page and more ego than practical sense. Let her shadow you, Mom had said, like it was some mentorship opportunity. I agreed. I let her sit in on calls, observe budget meetings, even loop into strategy sessions. Then, quietly, Lauren began scheduling those meetings herself without me. She started giving press interviews I never approved, using phrases I coined, and approving marketing budgets with a title she hadn't earned. It all felt slow and subtle until it wasn't. Until this morning's text. Until lawyers got involved. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a worn manila envelope. Its edges were creased from weeks of hesitation. I had looked at it every other day, but never opened it, never signed. Not until I was sure. Not until today, when they told me in plain language that I was no longer one of them. 2 months earlier, I'd sat across from a private equity team at a discreet cafe in St. Paul. I'd told them I was just exploring options, but I already knew what I needed: clean distance. I didn't need the cash, I needed clarity. I needed a break from being diminished under the guise of being part of a family business. The agreement inside was ready, signed, sealed, notarized. The valuation was generous. Terms were clean. Only one thing was missing: my name. I placed the packet flat on the desk, its weight heavier now. My mind wandered senior year valedictorian. I'd spent 2 weeks writing that graduation speech, rehearsing it every night in front of the fogged-up bathroom mirror. But the morning of the ceremony, Mom handed me a new draft. "This version's tighter," she said. More relatable. It barely even mentioned me. The revised speech opened with a story about Lauren staying up late to help me study. She hadn't. It ended with the two of us sharing the podium. That had always been the narrative. I carried the weight. Lauren got the spotlight, and Mom orchestrated it all like a symphony of erasure. Every single time. I looked down at my phone again. The message still sat there, clinical and cold, but unforgettable. I opened a new one, understood. No more, no less. Not because I wasn't furious, I was, but I was done offering pieces of myself to people who never valued the whole. No explanations, no pleas, no more trying to be heard. I hit send. Then calmly, I picked up a pen and signed the agreement. My signature, decisive, steady. I tucked the document back into its envelope and sealed it. My fingertips paused on the flap. Then I stood, grabbed my coat from the back of my chair, and headed for the elevator. Not a single person in the office looked up as I walked by. I didn't expect them to. That part of my life was already fading behind me, and I had no intention of turning back. I paused at the doorway, turning once to glance back at the plaque for the last time. Geneva Hartman, CEO and co-founder. Let them strip the title. Let them prop someone else in the chair I bled for. They could keep the desk, the strategy meetings the media mentions, all of it, but they would never get me again. I stepped into the elevator and pressed lobby. The hum of the motor kicked in as the floor count began its descent like a quiet countdown to liberation. I didn't glance back into the office. Not at the glass walls, not at the team I once built, not at the life I'd poured 20 years into. My eyes stayed on the blinking numbers. 34, 33, 32. Every floor a layer peeling off my back. By the time I hit the ground floor, I wasn't trembling. I was just cold. I didn't cry in the car. The silence between Minneapolis and St. Paul stretched long and gray, mirroring the clouds overhead. I drove with the windows up. No music, no calls, just the quiet murmur of the engine and the dull throb behind my ribs. The ache of clarity. By 2:06 p.m. I was stepping through the arched doorway of a small brick building nestled just off Lexington Parkway. You could miss it if you blinked, a deliberate choice. It was the antithesis of the glossy skyscrapers my mother worshipped. A receptionist greeted me with a soft smile and no questions. She's expecting you, Miss Hartman. No ID check, no flash of credentials, just quiet acknowledgement. Adler Strategic Holdings, a private legal and restructuring firm, had taken the lead on managing my exit. Down a hushed hallway behind a glass office door, etched with their name, she waited. Monica Adler stood when I entered, tall poised with a silver streak cutting through her otherwise jet black hair. Her handshake was firm, her eyes observant but kind. "You look calm," she said gently. I gave her a polite smile, one that didn't quite make it to my eyes. That's the part I practiced. We sat in her private office. No windows, no distractions, just clear surfaces, tidy filing cabinets, and a clock that ticked like a metronome. Safe, controlled. She slid a folder across the desk. Updated terms from this morning. All assets secured. Transition team is on standby. Tight NDAs across the board. No leaks, none. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope I'd sealed hours earlier, placing it neatly atop hers. 51%, I said quietly. Founding stake. Full voting rights. Transfer to initiate upon sign-off. Monica studied my expression. You understand, this will hit them like a freight train. I met her eyes. They've been blindsiding me for years. I just finally got out of the way. She gave the smallest nod of respect. For what it's worth, we're not buying this company for its tech or revenue. My brow lifted slightly. We're interested in its impact. The bones of what your family built are rotten. We don't patch rot. We rebuild from the ground up. And for the first time in days, I breathed. That word, reconstruction, settled in the room like dust on forgotten shelves. A month ago, over dinner at Meridian Grill in Edina, my mother looked across her wine glass and said, "You're too passive to lead." She said it with the precision of a surgeon, calm, efficient, brutal, as she cut into her steak like she was slicing away parts of me she'd decided no longer belonged. When I challenged her, tried to meet her gaze, she gave that same patronizing smile she always reserved for moments she wanted to gaslight me into silence. Don't be so sensitive, Geneva. That's why people don't take you seriously. Lauren, as usual, didn't look up. She was glued to her phone, scrolling, texting, smirking at things I wasn't part of. She didn't defend me. She never did. She let Mom say my ideas were soft and visionary in that tone that implied weakness, not brilliance. They had always been clear. My voice only mattered when there was a crisis to fix or funding to chase. Not for wins, not for legacy, never for credit. So eventually, I stopped arguing. I chose silence. And in that silence, I built a wall. Encrypted messages, untraceable calls, off-site meetings. I didn't just plan an exit. I engineered one, brick by brick, until it stood like a fortress they couldn't infiltrate. Monica flipped to the last page. Sign here. I didn't hesitate. It wasn't a revenge signature. It was a release. When the final stroke of ink dried, she glanced up. Your mother and sister are going to lose their minds. I expect they will. She leaned back in her chair, assessing me quietly. And you? I reached into my tote and pulled out a small wooden box, dark mahogany, worn smooth on the edges. I cracked the lid just enough to reveal the brass plate inside Arthur Hartman founder, my father. The man who taught me honesty mattered more than applause. I keep this, I said softly, because integrity should never be just a memory. Monica nodded once. You know, most people who come through here are either angry or broken. I closed the box, a calm finality settling into my spine. I was both, I said, but not anymore. Outside, the wind had picked up. A brisk slap to the face, like a reset button I didn't ask for, but desperately needed. I walked past the old corner cafe where Dad used to take me after doctor appointments. There was a chalkboard out front now. Pumpkin scones, back in season. I didn't stop. At 11:42 p.m., just as I was brushing my teeth, my phone buzzed on the counter. Colleen Hartman. Call me, please. Another buzz. Lauren. What did you do? And another. And another. By the time I crawled into bed, I'd counted 68 messages. I opened none of them. I shut the front door, slid the deadbolt into place. The hall light flickered above me as I slipped off my heels. The weight of the day settled over me. But this time, it didn't break me. I poured a glass of water. My phone lit up again across the room. Another call, another plea, and I didn't move an inch. And then 67 more. I didn't read them all. I didn't have to. The preview flashes on my screen told me everything. Panicked names, late-night desperation, and the unmistakable unraveling of something they never thought could be taken away. I stood still in my kitchen palms, braced against the cool marble countertop. My apartment, nestled in the historic Cathedral Hill neighborhood of St. Paul, had always felt like a world apart. Brick exterior, creaky floors, crooked window panes that resisted winter. A place with soul. I'd bought it with money I earned. I'd stripped the wallpaper myself, chosen every light fixture, and tonight it felt like a sanctuary. The screen flashed again. Lauren. Then an unknown number. Then Colleen. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear their voices to know exactly how they'd sound. My mother's would be clipped tight, straining to maintain control, but trembling at the edges. Lauren's would crack midway somewhere between accusation and desperation. That pleading tone she used when she knew she'd gone too far, but thought charm might rewrite the story. The messages kept coming. You didn't really go through with it, right? This can't be legal. Please respond. After all we did for you. I lowered myself onto the edge of the couch. My legs shook not from fear, but from exhaustion. A lifetime of holding my breath was finally exhaling all at once. The phone buzzed again, but I let it hum against the cushion. My gaze landed on the ceramic bowl atop my coffee table, just a small dish of spare keys, a cracked silver ring, and a single dark button. The button had come from my father's wool coat, the one that used to hang behind his office door like a sentinel. After his funeral, it vanished. No one asked if I wanted it. That button was all I had left of it, of him. Another vibration pulled me from the memory. You'll destroy the family legacy. I stared at the screen. That word legacy mocked me, as if what they protected was something sacred, as if it hadn't already been fractured years ago. What legacy? The legacy where decisions were made in locked rooms, where I was displayed at fundraisers, like the dependable daughter, but never allowed to speak on record, where my strategies were praised until Colleen disagreed, then dismissed entirely. I rose slowly and crossed the room to my desk. In the bottom drawer sat my old leather journal. I hadn't touched it in years, not since that board meeting where I chaired every committee but still walked out feeling like a ghost. I flipped to the final page and began to write, "Dear Mom, I wanted to believe you'd fight for me, not against me. I waited, hoping I'd belong, that if I worked harder, stayed quieter, earned more, you'd finally see me. But maybe you never even looked." I paused the pen hovering. Then I tore the page free, crumpled it into a tight ball, and walked it to the kitchen trash. Some words didn't need to be kept. I struck a match from the drawer and dropped the crumpled letter into the sink. The paper caught quickly, curling at the corners, before vanishing into quiet flame. No smoke alarm stirred, no drama. Just silent combustion. I watched until it turned to nothing but ash. It was nearly 2 a.m. when the flood of texts finally slowed. My phone battery hovered at 9%. I flipped it over, screen down, and curled beneath the throw blanket on the couch. I didn't want the bed tonight. The couch felt safer, closer to the floor, closer to me. And then the one message that mattered arrived. Not from Colleen, not from Lauren. It came from a contact saved under Adler Legal, FYI. The firm has frozen all outgoing transfers from the company. They attempted to move $2.4 million. Thought you'd want to know. I sat up slowly. Of course they had. Colleen always maintained a hidden reserve, her so-called rainy day stash. And Lauren, drunk at some charity gala years ago, once laughed that if things ever went south, she'd funnel everything offshore and start over on a beach. I guess tonight was her definition of south. I reached for my water, now lukewarm, and took a slow sip. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't even feel satisfaction. I just whispered to the dark, "Let the audits begin." The phone cast its pale light across the dark oak floors. I let it linger, the glow cold and clinical. Still, I didn't move. Eventually, I returned to the kitchen, settling at the island, fingers wrapped around a half-drunk mug of chamomile tea gone completely cold. I read the message again. They attempted to move $2.4 million. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I simply powered down the screen and placed the phone gently beside the mug. It wasn't surprising. Not really. I just didn't expect them to move that fast. By the time sunlight slipped through the sheer curtains, casting a soft stripe across the back of my hand, I was already showered, dressed, and nursing my second cup of coffee. I wore the slate gray suit Lauren once mocked. Too plain for a founder, she'd said. It had no frills, no designer label, just sharp lines and purpose. Like me. I sat cross-legged on the couch, laptop balanced, waiting for the acquisition team's morning check-in. At 8:02 a.m., the video window popped open. My reflection looked calm, calmer than I felt. "Good morning," Ms. Hartman said, Eleanor Langley, head of acquisitions. "We detected a flag transfer just after midnight and attempted movement of $2.4 million to a Delaware shell account." She didn't say the name on the registration. She didn't need to. I raised a brow. "Let me guess." Eleanor nodded. "Correct." I closed my eyes for a beat. "Proceed with full internal audit. No delays." "Yes, ma'am. We've already begun." I leaned back slightly in my seat, fingers steepled. They'd underestimated me one last time. "The LLC is called North Summit Ventures," Eleanor said. "Registered 6 months ago. No public operations. We traced it to Lauren and a former assistant from the board." Of course. Lauren never had the patience for subtlety. It had always been her style: create chaos. First, spin the narrative later. "We've paused all outgoing transactions as of this morning," Eleanor continued. "Our legal counsel is recommending a comprehensive audit. Initial internal memos indicate a recurring siphoning of funds labeled as consulting retainers." She paused. roughly 2.4 million. This year, alone. I leaned back, arms crossed. The number didn't shock me, not really. What hit harder was the timing. They knew I was exiting. They knew the ink wasn't dry. And still they scrambled, rushing to loot what they could. Like rats bailing from a burning ship before the hull gave in. Eleanor's voice softened. We'd like to ask if you'd consider staying involved for the time being. Not as an employee, just as a transition witness. Help ensure nothing gets scrubbed. I considered it. Barely a second. I'll do it, I said. But on one condition, no terminations yet. I want everything documented. She raised an eyebrow. Every transaction, every memo, every comment whispered behind glass doors, I said firmly. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that people rewrite history when they feel the walls closing in. Eleanor gave a crisp nod. Understood. We'll proceed quietly. By 10:15 a.m., Adler's digital forensics team had already begun combing archive servers. I wasn't physically on site, but my inbox buzzed constantly, scanned contracts, flagged transfers, internal emails. One flagged memo made me stop. It was from Colleen, dated 7 months back, sent directly to Lauren. Subject line, keep this under the radar. Geneva doesn't need the stress. My jaw tightened. I didn't reply. I just forwarded it to the legal team and closed the tab. Then I stood, letting the quiet of my apartment wrap around me like armor. I walked to the study fingertips, brushing across the oak bookshelf where my father's old business books stood in a crooked line. On the top row, nestled between two faded hardcovers, was the small wooden box I found after his funeral. I carried it to the desk, unlatched the lid, and lifted it open. Beneath yellowing photos and his final notepad sat a black thumb drive, taped carefully to the lid. Scrawled on the tape in his handwriting, in case they forget who built this. I plugged it in. No password, no encryption, just a single folder. Founder's Ledger. Inside spreadsheets, personal notes, scanned receipts, and financial records going back 18 years. And one letter, his resignation draft, dated just 2 weeks before the stroke that took him. I opened it. In black, shaky font, he wrote, Geneva is the only reason this ship is still afloat. When I'm gone, protect her, or this company will eat itself alive. I didn't cry. Not then. Not even when the screen blurred slightly from the morning light streaming through the windows. I simply saved everything to a new folder and backed it up twice on encrypted drives, once in the cloud, just in case. That afternoon, a formal notification landed in my inbox from Eleanor Langley. It was short, clinical. Subject: Emergency Governance Review. Time 9:00 a.m. Location: Adler HQ, 38th floor. Conference room, downtown Minneapolis. Attendance mandatory, all current board members. I stared at the words, attendance mandatory, and let out a soft, humorless laugh. They'd spent years pretending I wasn't part of the real company, called me the glue with that condescending tone, like I was decorative, replaceable, soft. Now they were about to find out just how strong that so-called glue held. When I stepped into the Adler conference room the next morning, the door clicked shut behind me with a finality that felt almost judicial. I didn't need to check the time. I'd been watching the minutes crawl since dawn, knowing this was the reckoning for them. Yes, but also for me. Colleen and Lauren sat side by side at the far end of the polished mahogany table, a lawyer flanking them with a thick folder open in front of him. I recognized it. Their favorite move: prepare, overcompensate, deflect. Colleen's perfectly manicured nails tapped an anxious rhythm on the wood. A nervous tick. I hadn't seen her this tense since the year-end holiday bonus error she swore no one would discover. Some board members gave me a half-hearted nod. One didn't look up from his phone. I used to share conference calls with these people. Late-night pitch decks. Takeout orders during product rollouts. Now I was just a ghost in the house I helped build. A witness. Adler's legal team stood at the head of the room, calm and focused. They didn't ease in. "Let's begin," said their lead counsel, clicking a remote. The first slide landed like a gavel, names, dates, transaction IDs. For the past 14 months, a voice narrated evenly, Company funds have been redirected through unauthorized consulting agreements. Each one was signed by either Colleen or Lauren Hartman. These contracts are linked to 3 LLCs, each tied to personal bank accounts, both domestic and offshore. I froze when the next slide appeared. Eldon Strategic Consulting. My father's name, Arthur Hartman, in the header of a shell company. He would have been disgusted. The presentation continued, one financial violation after another. Tuscany retreats disguised as compliance conferences. Spa dinners listed as recruitment events. Luxury hotels. Personal flights branded under marketing development. And finally, the $2.4 million wire attempt. The last desperate claw before Adler froze their access. No one gasped. Just the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the soft click of slides changing. When the presentation ended, the lead counsel set the remote down and looked around the room. There will be time for individual statements at the conclusion of the review, she said. No one moved. No one spoke. They weren't scrambling anymore. Now, they were sinking. If this moment left you breathless too, don't forget to subscribe. Geneva's reckoning isn't over yet, and trust me, what comes next will change everything. Then they turned to me. Ms. Hartman, would you like to make a statement? I stood slowly. My voice didn't waver. I stayed silent for years. I began because I couldn't bring myself to believe that my own family would steal from something we built together. I paused my gaze, sweeping the room, but I was wrong. Then I sat. No theatrics, no tears. Just the truth laid out like architectural blueprints of a house already consumed by fire. The lead counsel stepped forward once more. Our legal recommendation is as follows. Suspend all salary and bonus disbursements to Colleen Hartman and Lauren Hartman, effective immediately pending further investigation. She paused. Remove Colleen Hartman from all financial decision-making roles and appoint an interim CFO to maintain fiscal oversight and compliance. A breathless silence followed. Board members may now vote. The only sound was the shuffling of papers and the quiet click of a fountain pen as signatures were recorded. The motion passed. Unanimously. Colleen slammed her palm on the polished table. Her voice cracked, not with guilt, but with fury. This is our legacy, she hissed. You're tearing it to pieces. I just looked her in the eye and said, you already did. She turned toward me, face blotched, jaw clenched, but Lauren grabbed her wrist not with affection, just to keep her from making things worse. Then Eleanor lifted a final document from the packet. There's one more item, she said calmly, passing copies around the room. It was an email from Colleen. Subject line, next phase. Attached was a PDF containing wire instructions for an offshore account in Bermuda. Eleanor's tone didn't falter. This transfer was initiated the morning after Ms. Hartman received a message from Colleen requesting contact information for legal counsel. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Every face at that table turned toward my mother. And for the first time in my life, Colleen Hartman had nothing to say. The silence that followed was longer than it should have been. Heavy. Almost reverent. No one reached for coffee. No one cleared their throat. The buyer had dropped the final stone into the still lake, and the ripple had hit every corner. That transfer. It was the final nail. I stood pushing my chair back quietly. Thank you, I said to the board, voice steady. Then I turned and left. Outside, the humidity clung to my skin, dense and unrelenting. It was late afternoon in Minneapolis, and the air smelled like hot concrete and wet iron. I didn't head to the garage. I walked east instead toward the Mississippi River. I needed space, air that hadn't been tainted by betrayal. As I reached the overlook, my phone buzzed again. New message from Adler Legal. Subject confidential internal communications, Colleen Hartman. I opened the email expecting more receipts, maybe a wire confirmation or transaction history, but it wasn't that. It was an email from Colleen Hartman to someone named Bernard Crosswell, a financial advisor based in the Cayman Islands. The message was cold and clinical, but the subject line landed like a punch to the ribs. Transition strategy, discrete execution beneath it were attachments labeled draft structure, liquidation paths, final dissolution framework. She had sent it exactly 22 minutes after texting me that vague line about wanting to talk and how family comes first. That night, I had cried. I thought stupidly that maybe she was trying to reach out. Maybe she finally saw me. Maybe the truth had cracked something open in her. But no, she just needed time. Time to cover her tracks. I lowered myself onto a bench along the riverfront trail facing the Mississippi. My hands trembled, but no tears came. Not this time. And then a memory surfaced sharper than it had any right to be. My father, Arthur Hartman, after dinner one night when I was 16. He set down his glass, leaned in close, and said softly, "Blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Never let it silence you." Back then, I didn't fully understand. Now it was the only sentence I needed. The sun dipped low, painting the river in bronze and indigo. The breeze lifted my hair, but I didn't move. Not for a while. Eventually, I rose and walked home. My apartment felt still, but not empty. Not anymore. I poured a glass of water, then went to the bookshelf and pulled down my old journal. The binding was cracked, the corners curled. But it had survived. I flipped to a page written long ago during the launch of our first major platform. I'd written in bold ink, "We'll rise together," or not at all. I stared at it. Then I picked up a pen. Beneath the line, I wrote, "Survival is no longer a group effort." And this time, I underlined it twice. There were no bridges left to burn. But the ashes, they might still carry me somewhere new. That night, I ordered Thai food. I couldn't taste any of it. But the silence in my apartment no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like space. It felt earned. The next morning, just as I was pinning my hair back, my phone rang. I froze. I knew the number instantly. Mr. Ramsey. I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "Geneva." He said, his voice warm, steady. I read the journal excerpt. "Quite the storm you've walked through." I exhaled deep and full for the first time in days. "It's been a week," I admitted. "I always told people you were the brain behind the brand." The rest of them made noise. "You kept the engine running." Not everyone believed that. "Well," he said gently, "I did, and I happened to have some space." "Literal space," Mr. Ramsey said. "Downtown, a startup incubator I've been funding the last few years. It's clean, quiet, fully outfitted." He paused before adding, "And entirely yours if you want it. No strings. Just your name on the door and a fresh slate." It took me a second to respond. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied gently. "And when you're ready, build something better." We ended the call with a plan to meet next week. I didn't feel triumphant. But something had shifted. Later that afternoon, I drove out to northeast Minneapolis, to a part of town I hadn't visited in nearly a decade. There, tucked between warehouses and breweries, sat the old warehouse, once our makeshift factory floor, where our first line of devices had been assembled by hand. The old warehouse held echoes of our earliest days, where we first mapped layouts in chalk and built prototypes by hand. It was shuttered now. The lot cracked with weeds, but the bones of it were still there. I parked outside, stepped carefully over a patch of tall grass, and let myself through the side gate. My fingers still remembered the rusted code box. Inside, the air smelled of dust and distant memory, steel oil and sunlight on concrete. The machines were gone, but the faded outlines remained stenciled into the floor like ghosts. I moved slowly, fingertips brushing the walls. Alma, Frank, Denise, names I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Workers who stayed late with me, who helped hold it all together before my mother and sister ever stepped foot inside a boardroom. I reached the center of the floor, the spot where we'd sketched our first layout in chalk. "We started here," I whispered. "I can start again." Just then, my phone buzzed. It was my attorney, Karen Myers. Her voice came through steady but firm. "Geneva, they've filed a motion in federal court." I didn't speak. "Colleen's legal team is trying to freeze your personal assets," she continued. "It's retaliatory, but we're ready." We ended the call with a plan, but it left a tight knot pressing into my ribs. Not fear exactly, but pressure, exhaustion. the quiet knowledge that no chapter closes without one final storm. The next morning, I sat across from Karen in her office. Sunlight cut across the edge of the table like a blade. She just repeated it calmly, as if reading the forecast. "They're alleging malicious intent." I nodded for her to continue. "They're claiming you timed the sale to cause reputational harm, that you orchestrated the collapse. Their language is pointed." She slid the documents across the table. I scanned the first few pages. Words like sabotage, destabilization, calculated injury. They were painting me as a saboteur, some villain lurking in designer heels, plotting revenge behind boardroom curtains. "They're calling it emotional warfare," Karen added quietly. "They say your exit wasn't just strategic, it was personal." I raised an eyebrow. "They didn't mind being personal when they erased my voting rights," I murmured. "Or when they struck me from the founding records?" Karen nodded. "We've prepared a full response." "Timelines, emails, financial records," Karen said, flipping through the binder. "We've laid it all out. Every action you took was measured, documented." She tapped the page in front of me. "They predate their accusations by months." As I turned to the appendix, I stopped at a screenshot near the end. It was a text from Colleen to Lauren. "She's out. I want her nowhere near this." My lips curled not into a smile. Something firmer, sharper. By 11:00 a.m., Karen had filed our full counter response. By early afternoon, we were seated across from Colleen's legal team in a stark deposition room downtown. The space felt deliberately sterile. Fluorescent lights, stainless steel pitchers of water, and legal pads stacked with surgical precision. In the center of it, all sat Colleen Hartman, her posture stiff, her blouse perfectly pressed, but her eyes heavy beneath concealer that didn't quite hide the exhaustion. Her attorney leaned in. "Please answer the question, Ms. Hartman." Colleen blinked. She wasn't supposed to be part of it anymore. I didn't react. Karen followed up. "Did you ever formally notify Ms. Hartman about the board vote?" A pause. "No," Colleen admitted. "There wasn't a reason to. She wouldn't have supported the direction we were going, so you intentionally excluded her." Colleen's voice snapped like glass. "I protected the company from interference." Then her face froze. She'd gone too far. The court reporter's fingers never stopped moving. Later that evening, just outside the conference room, I passed Lauren in the hallway. She didn't speak, didn't lift her chin. But just before she turned away, I caught a flicker behind her eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, fear. And that was enough. That night, I curled up on my living room couch, a cup of peppermint tea warming my hands. I needed something to tether me. On the end table was an old photo in a worn black frame. From our first year in the company, the three of us, me, Lauren, and Colleen, shoulders touching, laughing in lab coats and jeans, arms draped around each other like we believed we'd always be that way. I remembered something now. Thanksgiving years ago, I was in the kitchen and I overheard Lauren whisper to Colleen, "You know she'll outgrow all of us." Back then, I thought it was affectionate. Now I heard it differently. They weren't afraid I'd leave. They were afraid I'd lead. Just before 9 p.m., the doorbell rang. A man in a slate gray suit stood on the porch, no emotion on his face. "For Ms. Geneva Hartman," he said, handing me a thick envelope. He didn't wait for acknowledgement, just turned and walked into the night. I stood in the doorway, the letter still in my hand, as the wind off the Mississippi brushed against my bare arms. I closed the door behind me, fingers brushing the seal. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. I placed it on the marble counter next to my lukewarm tea and just stood there. Their silence had become legal now, wrapped in cardstock and implication. Quiet. That had always been their endgame. Now, back in my kitchen, the envelope rested by my cold tea, quiet, clinical, like betrayal in a blazer. My hands pressed against the counter, not to steady myself, but to remember I was still here. They'd translated betrayal into bullet points. But I could still read between the lines. When I finally broke the seal, it confirmed what I'd already known in my gut. A formal settlement offer wrapped in diplomacy but laced with threat. Drop all counterclaims. Agree not to speak to the press. We'll settle quietly. That was their version of closure. A payout cloaked as generosity. A non-disclosure agreement written like a muzzle. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a price tag on my silence. The next morning, I sat across from Karen Myers in her office. The blinds were open just enough to let in a slant of morning sun. She didn't dance around it. "They're not looking to resolve," she said, flipping through the packet. "They're looking to erase." Her voice was steady, but her eyes didn't blink. "They want you out, but muted, untraceable, forgotten. That's the point of this NDA." I nodded slowly, tapping the corner of the document. "How generous is generous?" Karen raised an eyebrow. "Enough to tempt someone who's tired. Not enough to buy your name back." We both went quiet for a moment. I knew exactly what they feared. Not my case. My voice. Later that afternoon, while folding laundry on the couch, my phone buzzed with a text from Ali, a former colleague. "Have you seen Business Current today?" I hadn't. I dropped the towel and opened the link she'd sent. The headline hit like a slap. "Founding partner sells stake amid burnout rumors. A visionary era begins." I didn't need to see the byline to know exactly who planted it. The article dripped with corporate euphemism, internal friction, evolving leadership, and strategic realignment. Anonymous quotes danced around the truth like it was toxic. But one line stood out: "Geneva Hartman is poised to lead with clarity and innovation, filling the void left behind by a founder ready for rest." Rest. That's what they were calling it now. Exile recast as self-care. I almost laughed. Not out of humor, but disbelief. By the time I reached the third paragraph, my hands had stopped shaking. Not because I wasn't angry, but because I was ready. There was no panic left in me. Only clarity. This wasn't misunderstanding anymore. This was war launched under a silk napkin and framed like strategy. That evening, I met with Karen again. We sat in a quiet room at her office, in the North Loop, insulated from the weekend bustle outside. The fluorescent lights buzzed gently above us as I held the settlement letter between us like a flag I refused to wave. "I'm not signing," I said calmly. "They don't get to rewrite the story, then pay off the only person who actually lived it." Karen gave a single firm nod. Then we respond. Loudly. By Monday morning, we had filed a public countersuit breach of fiduciary duty, wrongful removal, and defamation. And we didn't stop there. At 9:00 a.m., sharp, my open letter went live. When family betrays you in boardrooms, you don't hide, you rebuild. And you bring receipts. The statement spread faster than either of us expected. I wasn't some headline darling, but I was the builder behind something people respected. And it turned out that mattered. The hashtags came next. Silent founders. Legacy hijacked. She built. This with them came emails from journalists, past investors, and dozens of former employees. My inbox turned into a digital confessional. By midweek, a burner email hit Karen's inbox. Check the attachments, they buried more than minutes. Karen called me an hour later. "You're not going to believe this," she said. Internal emails, time-stamped, forwarded between Colleen and Lauren, coaching board members on how to vote you out 2 full weeks before the vote was even announced. The walls they'd built starting to crack. On Thursday, I visited the company's downtown headquarters. I didn't come to cause a scene. I just needed to see something for myself. As I passed the main hallway, my feet slowed. The founder wall. There had once been 4 portraits. Now, there were 3. Mine was gone. I stood in front of the empty space where my image used to hang, heart quiet but steady. Then I turned and walked out without a word. That night back home, I went into my study. On the desk sat an old black and white photo, me and Dad, the day we signed our first prototype patent. We were outside in winter jackets, cheeks red from the cold, squinting mid-laughter. I slipped it into a new frame and set it near the window where the morning sun would catch it just right. "That's the only legacy I care to keep," I whispered. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. The knot in my chest returned not from fear, but recognition. Karen walked in, setting her briefcase down. "They pushed for a dismissal," she said. "Filed a motion this morning." I looked at her, breath held. She met my eyes. "The judge denied it," she said quietly. "We're going to trial." I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, letting those words settle in the stillness like the first break of dawn. "We're going to trial." I nodded. "Then, let's get to work." The next 3 weeks blurred both too fast and far too slow. Between depositions, discovery calls, and late-night strategy sessions, I barely slept. But strangely, I found peace in the process. There was something healing about finally being allowed to speak without being interrupted, dismissed, or quietly edited out of the company I helped build. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed deliberately. No power suit, no curated elegance. Just a navy wool dress that fit like memory and my father's old cufflinks, tiny silver hammers fastened at the wrists. He'd worn them the day we broke ground on our first warehouse in Bloomington. The Hennepin County Courthouse was already buzzing when we arrived. Press vans lined the block. Cameramen lingered just behind the security barricades, hoping for a glimpse. Security led us through a side entrance. Inside, every bench in the gallery was filled. Former employees, local business owners, college classmates, strangers who had followed every headline. Colleen and Lauren were already seated at the defendant's table. Colleen glanced up, met my eyes, and quickly looked away. Lauren stared straight ahead, jaw locked so tightly it looked like she was chewing glass. I took my seat beside Karen Myers. She leaned over, voice low. "You still want to speak first?" I nodded once. I didn't come this far to stay quiet. The judge gave the signal. I stood. I didn't come here for revenge. I began. My voice was steady, though my palms tingled. I came here for the truth. And for every woman who's ever been told to be grateful while they're being erased. Silence. A deep, respectful stillness settled over the courtroom. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice held. Over the next 2 days, we laid it all out. The emails I was never copied on. Financial decisions I wasn't consulted about. Memos marked confidential that strategically excluded my name. Asset transfers I never approved. And then the clip. A time-stamped video of Lauren standing in a conference room issuing directives to department heads. No legal authority, no board authorization. She laughed at one point. "Don't worry," she said. "Geneva's too busy with her little pet projects to notice." Then came the witness testimony. A former intern took the stand. Barely 22. Her voice soft, but certain. Geneva was the only one who learned my name. She said. She stayed late during grant deadlines. She listened. "Did Colleen Hartman ever mentor you?" the judge asked. The girl hesitated. "No, sir. She only came by when there were cameras." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Do you believe Ms. Hartman's removal was lawful?" A beat. "No, sir." The intern said again, this time firmer. "It wasn't right." By the afternoon of the third day, the mood in the courtroom had shifted. The smugness had cracked. Lauren tapped her pen incessantly. Colleen leaned in to whisper urgently to their counsel, and then the judge lifted the envelope. The judge adjusted his glasses, eyes steady as they scanned the courtroom. "This court finds that the board acted with gross misconduct and exclusionary malice." He began, his voice firm and unwavering. "The removal of Ms. Hartman was not only unethical, but deliberately orchestrated to erase her contributions from the company's legacy." The room held its breath. The court orders full restitution of withheld shares. He continued a correction to all public records and corporate materials naming Geneva Hartman as a founding partner and a formal acknowledgement of her role in both the inception and sustained growth of the organization. Then he looked at me directly. "You are fully vindicated." No tears came. Just a breath, deep, deliberate, and the quiet release of tension I hadn't even realized I'd carried for months. Outside, the courthouse steps were swarming. Microphones extended like antennas. Cameras snapped relentlessly. Questions came rapid fire. "Will you return to the company? Are you planning another venture? Do you have a statement for Colleen or Lauren?" I held up a hand and spoke just once. "I don't need a title to know my worth. But some truth deserved to be spoken aloud. That's all I ever wanted." That evening, I returned to the old warehouse in northeast Minneapolis, our first space still bearing the faded nameplate above the roll-up door. Paint chipped, rust curling along the corners, but it stood strong. I wasn't alone. Beside me walked Kara, a young founder I'd been mentoring for nearly a year. She had energy that reminded me of myself at her age, sharp, unshaken, with a sketchbook full of wild, brilliant ideas. As we stepped inside, the familiar scent of sawdust concrete and ambition washed over us. The echoes of old machines and long nights clung to the walls like memory. "I can't believe this is where it all started," she said, turning in a slow circle, eyes wide. I smiled gently and reached into my bag, pulled out a ring of keys, worn and scratched metal, dulled by time and use. "This was never meant to be a monument," I told her, placing the keys in her hand. "It's a launch pad. Your turn now." Her eyes shone, and I saw the future reflected there. Back at home that night, the house was quiet. I walked to the bookshelf in my study and pulled down one final photo. Me and Dad, arms around each other, covered in dirt and sweat from our very first site inspection. Grinning like fools, I placed it next to the framed court ruling, now carefully mounted in the corner of the shelf. No spotlight, no speeches, just quiet, just peace. I had built an empire once with people who forgot how we got there. But now I was building something better. Not alone, not erased, and never silent again. If you've made it this far, thank you. I didn't share this story for sympathy. I shared it because silence is how they win, and I've done enough of that for a lifetime. If something in my journey reminded you of your own being overlooked, written off, or pushed aside in a place you helped build, I want to hear from you. Truly. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to stand up for your own truth. Your voice matters now more than ever. I read every message, and in a world that tried to make me feel invisible, your words mean more than you know. And if you're wondering what to take from this, it's this: never mistake keeping the peace for keeping yourself small. I did for far too long. I thought, if I just worked harder, stayed quiet, kept my head down, they'd finally see me. They didn't. And when I found the strength to walk through fire instead of around it, something unexpected happened. I came home to myself. You don't need a title to lead. You don't need their permission to rise. And you sure as hell don't need to carry shame for being the one who tells the truth when everyone else would rather pretend. So if you're in a chapter where the people around you can't see your worth, keep building anyway. Keep documenting. Keep showing up. Because someday your voice might not just heal you, it might light the way for someone else. Just like someone once did for me. And if you're ready to see what comes next, hit that subscribe button. We're not done yet.